While the First Punic War lit the fire of aggression between the dueling powers, it was the Second Punic War that would secure the hatred both sides had for each, and ensure that Rome, after back-to-back victories, would remain the superior entity. But more was to come. Carthage had been drastically weakened and crippled by the most recent war and peace treaty, but it nevertheless still existed. And this bothered one too many Romans. After Rome's triumph in the Second Punic War, Carthage had a steep price to pay in talents, land, and military autonomy. Possibly one of the most significant restrictions that Rome had now placed on Carthage was the agreement that Carthage was unable to wage war in any form without the permission of the Roman Republic. And this even included defensive wars. Massinissa, a contemporary Numidian king and ally to Rome, would take full advantage of this deal between Rome and Carthage, as the Numidians were looking to expand, and their neighbors in Carthage had some territory to spare. Over the span of a few decades, Massinissa was slowly chipping away at Carthaginian holdings, and whenever his victims appealed to Rome, desperate to declare war back and defend their cities, the Romans refused and instead supported the Numidians. For a stunning amount of time, the beaten-down Carthaginians actually obeyed this demand and refrained from military action. But this would eventually change. In 151 BC, Carthage had had enough. Under attack yet again from the Numidians, the contemporary Carthaginian general Hasdrubal the Bow-at-Harch mobilized a significant army and launched a counteroffensive. Although Carthage would ultimately lose the conflict, and Hasdrubal would be sentenced to death for his breach of the treaty with Rome, the latter was far from forgiving when it came to the Carthaginians. Instead of recognizing the stagnant military weakness of Carthage, an important handful of Roman senators insisted now more than ever that Carthage posed a threat to the Roman Republic, and therefore must be destroyed. No one knows exactly why the Senate soon decided that war with Carthage was best. Some attribute it to greed, others to the threat of commercial competition, or potentially even a fear of political rivalry. Theories abound, and none have been proven as fact, but we do know the opinions of a couple Roman senators who spared over the matter for some time. One, by the name of Scipio Nasica, argued that Carthage must remain intact. Even if weakened, the constant looming possibility of a threat from Carthage could be used by Roman officials to keep the Republic united and the people under better control. On the flip side, and the eventual winning side, was Cato. Remembered for his strong anti-Carthage sentiments, Cato believed that Carthage must be destroyed, and the matter was that simple. With the indemnity paid off and its economy growing, Carthage had made itself appear even more threatening to those who wished to convince the Romans that it really was. And with the unapproved military action against the Numidians, the Carthaginians were nearly handing the Romans reasons to declare war. Still, there were attempts made by Carthage to de-escalate through diplomacy once word got out of the Roman senators' ambitions. It was too late for negotiations, though. Cato's faction had won the debate, and Rome knew what Rome wanted: the downfall of the Carthaginians. In 149 BC, a massive Roman army led by co-consuls Manius Manilius and Lucius Calpurnius Piso landed at the port city of Utica, not far from Carthage itself. It had already been decided by Rome that war was inevitable, but the Carthaginians were determined to save their city through diplomacy, and subsequently sent an embassy to meet with the Romans and make peace. Rome reacted first by attempting to disarm the Carthaginians, and, when obeyed, next demanded that the city of Carthage be abandoned and then destroyed upon the Carthaginian relocation. It was at this point that the Carthaginians had had enough, and finally understood that they only had one option left. They must defend their city at all costs. Recognizing now that Rome could never be a friend, the Carthaginians released the condemned Hasdrubal from death row and informed him that he was needed once again to defend the city of Carthage, but this time from the Romans. When the latter arrived at the city walls, they quickly understood that they would have to besiege the city as they were unable to get past the barriers. This led to a fairly slow development for the first portion of the war, as Carthage attempted to disrupt Roman supply lines and damage their ships, but only found minimal success as the invaders managed to defend themselves while trying to break through the Carthaginian defenses. Small-scale, off-and-on skirmishes continued into the following year, at which point Rome decided to change up its strategy a bit after the election of new consuls. Instead of continuing with such a heavy siege of Carthage, it seemed more possible to first defeat all of Carthage's friendly neighbors and then deal with the weakened city itself. This plan was only minimally successful, though. Most of the Carthaginian allies held up just fine against Roman assaults, but things changed yet again when the grandson of the great Scipio Africanus, also named Scipio, was elected consul in 147 BC in order to give him full command of the campaign. And this was just what Rome needed. Meanwhile, though, within the walls of Carthage, Hasdrubal had lost either faith in or respect for his own government and decided that the only solution was for him to take over. So, he did exactly that, overthrowing the current authorities and now controlling not only the military but the entire city. This was just in time for Scipio's appointment as consul and meant that the remainder of the war would showcase the wit and skill of both men, face to face. Upon his appointment as consul, Scipio got right to resolving one of the main issues that the Romans were facing, and that was a plethora of poorly disciplined and motivated troops, all of which the new authorities swiftly dismissed. Those who remained were now held to a higher standard of effort and efficiency. Scipio was then focused on, once and for all, breaking through the city's defenses, and to this extent, he quickly found success. In the dark of the night, he and a few thousand of his men breached the city walls and forced the Carthaginian defense to flee. Nevertheless, this victory was only partial, as Scipio recognized the risks of remaining inside the city walls with such a small force and opted to withdraw before daylight broke. Both leaders were now angry for different reasons. Hasdrubal was furious with his defense forces for not only failing to stop the Roman advance, but then for fleeing the scene. On the other hand, Scipio was angry at the fact that Roman progress was still slow, and they had failed to cut off the supply of necessities by sea into Carthage. In a show of force, Hasdrubal put on a display of torturing his Roman prisoners of war, while Scipio tried to cut Carthage off from outside help. Neither action really did much, and a full-blown battle soon broke out on the seas. The events that followed led to more Roman progress against Carthaginian troops and fortifications, but still nothing monumental, and not what Scipio wanted. It wouldn't be until 146 BC that the Roman consul would get his wish, ready to bring an end to the war. As spring rolled around, Scipio launched a new siege on the city, which this time actually worked. The Romans entered the city with rage in their hearts and destruction on their minds. Over the next week, Scipio led his men in a scorched earth rampage, massacring the citizens of Carthage and burning the city to the ground. Only 50,000 Carthaginians were spared, and only then to be taken prisoner and sold into slavery. Hasdrubal, to the disgust of his own wife who chose death instead, surrendered. Scipio agreed to let him live and not to make him a slave as would happen to the others. But that was all the Romans had to offer. Carthage was gone. Hasdrubal lost everything, and Rome got what it had wished for. The surrounding territory that had belonged to Carthage were also seized by the Romans, and it was clear by now that the Carthaginian Empire was no more. After 3 years, each tipping the scales further and further in favor of the Roman Republic, there would no longer be a doubt that when it came to Rome and Carthage, the latter ultimately collapsed. But while the Punic Wars were a pillar of Rome's early history, they were not all that occurred during this era. In fact, throughout the Punic Wars, the history of Rome was made up of much, much more.